The accusation. The rough grip on Alara's arm tightened, dragging her further down the gilded corridor. Each clanking step of the armored guards echoed her accelerating heartbeat. The opulent tapestries depicting ancient victories blurred past, their vibrant colors mocking the grey dread coiling in her gut. She stumbled, her knees threatening to buckle, but the guards were relentless, their faces masks of grim resolve. The scent of polished stone and something vaguely metallic, fear, perhaps, or the cold sweat of anticipation, filled her nostrils. She risked a glance over her shoulder, searching for a sympathetic face, but found only the impassive stares of palace servants who quickly averted their gaze, their terror nearly mirroring her own. They halted before massive carved doors, intricately detailed with snarling wolf heads. As the door swung inward, a wave of hushed whispers and the heavy, earthy scent of ancient magic washed over her. The High Council chamber was a cavernous space, bathed in the muted light, filtering through high, arched windows. Around a crescent-shaped table sat the elders, their faces etched with centuries of power and privilege. At the apex, on a raised dais, sat Alpha King Theron, his form imposing, even in repose. He was a statue of granite and shadow, his silver eyes, usually so piercing, now unreadable, fixed on some distant point beyond the room. Council Elder Lysander rose, his movements deliberate, his voice a silken pronouncement that nonetheless resonated through the vast chamber. Alara of the Shadowfen, you stand accused before the High Council and your Alpha King. His gaze, usually warm and paternal, was now as sharp as broken glass. The diviners have spoken. The omens are clear. You carry the mark of forbidden blood, a taint that threatens the purity of our lineage, a danger to the very heart of our pack. Elara's breath hitched. Forbidden blood. It was a nightmare, a cruel jest. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice reedy against the solemn silence. I've done nothing wrong. My lineage is pure, I swear it. Lysander merely offered a pitying, almost regretful smile. Your denial is expected, child, but the signs do not lie. We have felt the tremors, seen the dark whispers in the moon's reflection. Such a corruption cannot be tolerated. He gestured to a nearby guard, who approached with a small, ornate silver box. Lysander opened it, revealing a vial of viscous, dark liquid. This, Alara, is proof. A drop of your blood, tested by ancient rites, revealed the truth. It pulsed with an energy that should not exist. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She had felt a strange, tingling sensation at her fingertips, a sudden warmth that had frightened her, but she had dismissed it as nerves. Could it be this? Could it truly be real? Lysander's voice hardened, losing its veneer of sorrow. Therefore, by the ancient laws and the will of the High Council, you are hereby sentenced. You shall be confined to the forgotten tunnels beneath the palace, where your insidious blood can cause no harm, where its dark influence will remain contained. Elara's eyes darted to Alpha King Theron, a silent plea in their depths. He remained motionless, his jawline taut, his gaze still distant. His silence was an acceptance, a crushing weight that stole the air from her lungs. He believed them. He believed she was a danger, a corruption. The betrayal stung more than any physical blow. Seraphina, the captain of the royal guard, stood beside Theron's throne, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, however, flickered towards Alara for a fraction of a second, a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation before settling back into rigid impassivity. Kyle, Lysander's ambitious aide, watched from the periphery, his face a mixture of apprehension and eager attention, clearly hoping to absorb every nuance of this display of power. "No!" Alara cried, her voice finally breaking free, raw with desperation. "Please, I beg you, I am not a threat. I don't understand any of this." Her pleas were met with stone-faced indifference. Lysander gave a curt nod to the guards. "Take her!" They seized her arms again, pulling her roughly from the chamber. As the door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the last vestige of light and hope, Ilara felt a profound hollowness. She was alone, abandoned. The descent into the palace's forgotten underbelly was a slow, agonizing plunge into darkness. The air grew heavy, damp and cold, carrying the faint scent of mildew and earth. The grand halls gave way to narrow, uneven passages, lit by sputtering torches that cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The echoes of their footsteps were swallowed by the oppressive silence. Finally, they reached a crudely carved cell door, secured by a heavy iron bar. The guards unchained her, but only to refasten her wrists to a thick ring embedded in the damp stone wall. The chains were heavy, cold against her skin. The door clanged shut, plunging her into utter blackness. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. The cold seeped into her bones, making her shiver uncontrollably. There was no straw, no blanket, just the rough stone floor and the endless, crushing silence. She sank to the ground, pulling her knees to her chest, her body trembling. Tears, hot and furious, streamed down her face, but they brought no relief. She was a prisoner, falsely accused, her fate sealed by a council that feared what they didn't understand, and an alpha king who had turned a blind eye. Despair was a living entity in the darkness, a cold, predatory presence that pressed in on her, threatening to consume her entirely. The beast's cry. A terrible, guttural howl ripped through the palace, a sound so raw and despairing it seemed to tear at the very foundations of stone and earth. It was a cry unlike any heard from an Alpha King's beast before, devoid of fury or dominance, instead laced with an unbearable agony that reverberated through the night. Theron, usually a figure of implacable calm, thrashed in his opulent bed, sweat beading on his brow as his own beast writhed within him. It snarled, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through his bones, refusing to be silenced. Its agitation was a physical torment, pulling at his very essence, demanding release from an invisible, unbearable pain. He clutched his head, trying to force down the rising tide of primal distress. "Silence," he commanded, his voice a strained whisper in the dark. But the beast only intensified its protests, a mournful lament that clawed at his sanity. He rose, his muscles coiling with a restless energy that mirrored the turmoil inside. The beast paced within him, a caged predator sensing a profound threat, an irreparable loss. Theron stalked through his chambers, the rich tapestries and polished floors offering no solace. He tried to focus, to identify the source of its distress, but it was an amorphous, pervasive ache that seemed to emanate from the very air. His attempts to calm it were futile. He tried to assert dominance, to command it into submission, as he had countless times before. But this was different. This was not a challenge, but a profound suffering that defied his will, a grief so potent it threatened to unravel him. The howling intensified, now punctuated by sharp, distressed whimpers that tore at the edges of his control. The beast dragged him, not in a direction of attack, but of desperate yearning. It pulled him from his chambers, down hushed corridors where the sounds of its anguish echoed, startling the few guards on duty. Their faces, usually impassive, showed a flicker of fear and confusion at the unprecedented display of the Alpha's inner turmoil. Theron ignored them, his focus consumed by the relentless pull, the agonizing cries that seemed to guide him deeper into the palace's hidden core. He followed the agonizing cries, a frantic compass within his soul, past familiar halls and into rarely used passages. The air grew colder, the stone walls rougher, as he descended into the forgotten depths beneath the palace. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through distant grates, illuminating a path into a world long abandoned. The scent of damp earth and stale air grew stronger, a stark contrast to the perfumed elegance of the upper levels. The beast's distress sharpened, transforming from a general lament into a focused, desperate plea. Theron felt it pressing against an unseen barrier, whimpering now, a high-pitched, almost childlike sound that twisted his gut. His hands, guided by an instinct beyond his understanding, found the rough, unadorned door that marked the entrance to the forgotten tunnels. It was a heavy slab of ancient wood, bound with rusting iron, a barrier meant to conceal and contain. He pushed it open, the creak echoing ominously in the oppressive silence. The darkness beyond was absolute, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow all light and hope. Yet the beast urged him forward, its whimpers growing more frantic, a relentless thrumming in his blood. He stumbled down a short flight of stone steps, the air growing thick with the scent of despair and something else. Something familiar, yet out of place in this forgotten tomb. And then he saw it. Not with his eyes, for the darkness was too profound, but with the raw, primal vision of his beast. It was there, pressed against the cold, unyielding metal of a cell door, a phantom form of his inner wolf, whining pitifully. Its powerful head was bowed, its muzzle nudging against the bars, a soft, heartbroken sound escaping its throat. It wasn't howling now, but crying, a deep, mournful sound of unbearable loss and longing. The beast, his beast, the formidable force that commanded respect and fear across the lands, was whimpering. And it was whimpering for someone inside that cell. For Elara. A profound shock coursed through Theron, momentarily eclipsing the beast's anguish. He stood frozen, watching the phantom manifestation of his own wolf, a creature he thought he fully understood, betraying everything he had believed. It was not a beast of rage or war, but of profound, unshakable connection. And that connection, that desperate, yearning cry, was directed at the very girl he had allowed to be chained in this desolate place, the girl he had condemned as having forbidden blood. His rational mind screamed in protest, but the beast's cries were undeniable. It wasn't just whimpering, it was trying to comfort, to reach, to protect. It was a bridge of raw emotion, spanning the chasm of cold stone and colder judgment. It was calling for her. The weight of his earlier silence, his detached acceptance of Lysander's accusations, crashed down upon him. He had seen her fear, her desperation, her plea, and had done nothing. But his beast, his own savage soul, had known from the moment she was dragged away that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. And now it screamed its agony for her, for the one it recognized as safe, as vital. A glimmer of peace. The heavy iron door, encrusted with centuries of forgotten dust and grimy rust, groaned in protest as Theron's powerful hands seized its cold bar. The lock, a crude mechanism of ancient design, clicked with a hollow finality as he disengaged it. Each metallic sound reverberated through the suffocating silence of the forgotten depths, a stark counterpoint to the insistent, low rumble within his own chest. His beast, still a phantom presence, pulsed with a renewed, insistent yearning, its ghostly form pressing against the iron, a whimper escaping its spectral maw. He pushed the door inward, the hinges shrieking, revealing a chamber steeped in perpetual twilight. A single, flickering torch, placed by the guards hours ago, cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn stone walls. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, clung to him, a chilling embrace. And then he saw her, Ilara. She sat huddled on the stone floor, her back against the far wall, her delicate frame almost swallowed by the oppressive gloom. Chains, heavy and cruelly wrought, bound her wrists to iron rings embedded in the wall, pulling her arms taut above her head. Her head was bowed, a curtain of dark hair obscuring her face, but even in the dim light, the stark paleness of her skin, the visible tremor in her shoulders, spoke of profound fear and exhaustion. The moment his eyes settled on her, an astonishing transformation rippled through Theron. The agonizing ache in his chest, the raw, visceral torment that had driven him to this forgotten cell, vanished. It was as if a jagged wound had suddenly knitted itself closed. His beast, a tempest of suffering moments before, stilled. The frantic whimpers ceased, replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible purr that vibrated deep within his bones. It was a sound of profound contentment, of a long-sought peace finally attained. Theron took a slow, deliberate step into the cell, his gaze fixed on Ilara. He saw her flinch, her head snapping up, her wide, luminous eyes meeting his. Fear, raw and unadulterated, flickered within their depths, but beneath it, a spark of defiance, a quiet resilience, shone through. She was not crying, she was simply enduring. The sight of her, so small and vulnerable, yet holding such inexplicable sway over his savage inner nature, sent a jolt through him. The council's pronouncements, the elders' dire warnings of a cursed bloodline, of a dangerous taint within her, shattered against the undeniable reality unfolding before him. His beast, a creature of primal instinct and untamed power, was not recoiling in terror. It was not snarling in aggression. It was purring. With a sound so soft it was almost a whisper, it nudged against his mind, a gentle pressure that conveyed one irrefutable truth. Safe. She is safe. A cold, hard knot of shame tightened in Theron's gut. He had allowed this. He had stood by, silent and unmoving, while they condemned her, while they chained her like a beast. He had believed their lies, or perhaps, more accurately, he had allowed his own fear of the unknown to blind him to the truth. Ilara was not cursed. She was not a threat. She was, in some unfathomable way, a bomb, the only one. He moved towards her then, his strides purposeful, the faint clang of his armor echoing in the small space. Ilara tensed, her eyes widening, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to shrink further into the wall, a futile effort against the inevitable. "Don't touch me," she rasped, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper. Yet, the defiance was still there, a flickering ember in the darkness. Theron ignored her plea. His hand, warm and calloused, reached for the heavy chain binding her left wrist. The iron was cold beneath his touch, a stark symbol of the injustice he had allowed. The purr in his chest intensified, a soft thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very air, a strange, comforting melody in the grim cell. He examined the lock, a simple, heavy mechanism designed for brute force, not subtle manipulation. With a grunt, he pulled at the chain, testing its resistance. The iron creaked, but held fast. He pulled again, harder, his muscles straining, and with a sharp crack, the ancient metal shrieked, tearing free from the stone. The ring, still attached to the chain, scraped against the wall as it came loose. Ilara gasped, her eyes fixed on his face, a mixture of terror and disbelief warring within them. Theron knelt before her, the purring a constant, soothing presence. He took her freed wrist in his hand, his thumb brushing lightly over the chafed skin where the chain had dug in. He could feel the fragile beat of her pulse beneath his touch. Then, with a swift, powerful twist, he snapped the remaining chain, the sound sharp and definitive in the quiet cell. He looked at her, truly looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "You are free," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of inflection. "And you are under my protection." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The beast within him, utterly calm now, seemed to nod its approval. It was a silent vow, made in the depths of a forgotten dungeon, a promise of safety to the girl he had condemned. The fragile thread of trust, so easily broken, now had a chance to be rewoven. Whispers and schemes, the heavy oak doors of the High Council chambers slammed shut, their reverberations stirring the ancient tapestries that chronicled forgotten wars. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with a fury eclipsing any natural tempest. Lysander, his usually flawless robes now rumpled, stalked the polished floor like a predator confined. His face, typically an unreadable mask of authority, was a landscape of panicked worry, his silver hair in disarray. "He freed her," Lysander hissed, the words bitter on his tongue. "Defied us all, the Alpha King himself." Kyle, Lysander's ambitious aide, stood by an arched window, his gaze fixed on the distant outline of the royal training grounds. He remained silent, his fingers drumming a quiet, restless rhythm against the stone sill. A flicker of something enigmatic, apprehension laced with a burgeoning excitement, danced across his sharp features. This unexpected turn, Theron's abrupt defiance, had fractured the established order, revealing a potential shortcut to power Kale had scarcely dared to imagine. "Do you grasp the gravity of this, Kyle?" Lysander spun, his voice escalating. "Not only has he made a mockery of our judgment, but he has reintroduced her into the light. Her very presence. It jeopardizes everything." Kyle finally turned, his expression carefully neutral. "The people witnessed it, Elder, saw him shatter her chains with his bare hands. They perceived the ferocity in his eyes, an almost primal devotion. It wasn't merely the Alpha King they observed, but something far more ancient, more untamed." Lysander shivered. That beast within him, we always recognized its volatile power, but it was contained, controlled. Now it dictates his actions, and it demands her protection. He slammed a fist onto the massive council table. "Her cursed blood. It must not be permitted to surface. Not now. Not when we are so near to securing our legacy." Kyle's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "So, her imprisonment wasn't solely about her curse, was it, Elder? It was about something deeper, something you've been safeguarding." Lysander's gaze snapped to Kyle, sharp as a dagger. "Mind your tongue, boy. Some secrets are best left undisturbed, and you would do well to remember that your fate is intertwined with mine." A subtle smile touched Kyle's lips, swiftly veiled. "Of course, Elder, my loyalty is absolute. But perhaps with Theron's sudden shift, our strategy requires adaptation. We cannot simply declare her a danger when the Alpha King himself champions her. The populace will question." "They will question," Lysander snarled, raking a hand through his hair. "And that is precisely what we must prevent. The truth of her lineage. It must remain hidden. Should it emerge, everything we've constructed, every sacrifice made, it would crumble." He began to pace again, a frantic energy radiating from him. "We must discredit her. Portray her as a siren, a witch who has captivated the Alpha King, sow seeds of doubt about Theron's own sanity." Kyle listened, his mind already conjuring scenarios, weighing the merits of aligning with Lysander's desperate plans or subtly undermining them. This was his moment, a misstep from Lysander, a chink in his armor, and Kale could fill the void. Meanwhile, in the bustling courtyard below, Seraphina, captain of the Royal Guard, felt a disquiet that had little to do with the chill wind. She stood beside Theron, her posture rigidly professional, but her inner world churned. The raw power Theron had unleashed, the way his beast had roared not in aggression, but in a profound declaration of possession over Alara. It had been profoundly unsettling. She had always prided herself on unwavering loyalty to the crown, to the established order. Yet, the council's increasingly frantic whispers, their abrupt shift from condemnation to panicked plotting, grated against her sense of justice. She had seen the fear in Alara's eyes, the deep weariness, but never the malice the council had so vehemently proclaimed. And Theron. The Alpha King had always been formidable, but now, with Alara at his side, a new, untamed strength emanated from him, a dangerous, magnetic force. As she watched Theron guide Alara towards the royal apartments, a fleeting image surfaced in her mind. The small, almost imperceptible tremor that had run through Alara's chained body when Lysander had delivered her sentence. A flicker of human vulnerability that contradicted every accusation made against her. Seraphina's jaw tightened. The council's fear was palpable, almost sickening. And Theron's sudden, fierce protection of Alara felt less like a lapse in judgment and more like an awakening. The ground beneath their feet was shifting, and Seraphina knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would soon have to choose a side. And the path of loyalty to the crown was no longer as clear as it once seemed. The whispers from the council chambers were growing louder, laced with desperation and the stench of deceit. And Theron, oblivious to their schemes, was drawing Alara ever closer to the heart of their world. Fragile trust, the heavy oak doors of Theron's private wing closed with a soft thud, sealing Alara within a gilded cage. She stood, back pressed against the cool wood, her gaze darting around the opulent chamber. Tapestries depicting ancient hunts adorned the walls, their threads shimmering in the light, filtering through tall, arched windows. A massive four-poster bed dominated the room, draped in furs that looked impossibly soft. It was a stark contrast to the rough stone and stale air of her recent prison, yet the unease in her stomach churned just as fiercely. Freedom, it seemed, came with its own set of chains. Theron stood by the hearth, his back to her, a silent, imposing silhouette against the dancing flames. The air crackled with unspoken tension, thick and suffocating. Alara's instincts screamed at her to flee, to find a hidden corner and disappear. But where would she go? He was her captor, her protector, and perhaps her only hope. A low growl, deep and resonant, rumbled through the room, not from Theron's throat, but from within him. It was the beast, she realized, its presence a palpable weight in the space. Unlike the menacing snarl she'd heard in the tunnels, this sound was different. It was a mournful hum, a watchful presence that settled on her like a warm cloak. She found herself relaxing, just a fraction, her shoulders easing from their rigid brace. The beast was a strange, silent guardian, its instinctual understanding a stark contrast to Theron's veiled expressions. He turned then, his eyes, the colour of storm clouds, finding hers. There was no accusation, no judgment, only an unreadable depth that held her captive. "You are safe here," he stated, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the room. It was a command, not a question. Alara swallowed, her throat dry. "Safe," she echoed, the word tasting like ash. "From what? Or from whom?" Theron's jaw tightened. "From those who seek to harm you, from those who believe your blood is a curse." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "They are wrong." The simple declaration, delivered with such quiet conviction, sent a shiver through her. It was the first true acknowledgement of her innocence she'd heard from anyone in power. A tiny seed of trust, fragile and tentative, began to sprout within her. He gestured to a low, cushioned bench near the window. Rest. You've endured much. She hesitated, then slowly moved, her stiff muscles protesting with every step. The bench was indeed soft, the velvet cool against her skin. She sat, keeping her gaze on him, still wary. Theron remained by the hearth, his presence a constant, unwavering anchor. The beast within him continued its soft, watchful hum, a constant reassurance that bridged the chasm of their silence. It was an unspoken understanding, an invisible thread connecting them. Why? Elara finally dared to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Why did you defy them for me? He looked at her then, a flicker of something raw and unburdened passing through his eyes before his usual mask of stoicism returned. My beast recognized you, he said, the words heavy with an unfamiliar vulnerability. It knew. It chose. The raw honesty of his admission surprised her. He wasn't speaking of duty or justice, but of an instinct deeper than reason. This was not the Alpha King, cold and unyielding, but something else entirely. A sudden, sharp pain lanced through Theron's temple, a jolt that made him clench his fists. A wave of dizziness washed over him, the room tilting precariously. He swayed, his knuckles white against the mantelpiece. The beast within him, usually a steady presence, thrashed, a sudden, unfamiliar agitation replacing its calm. It was a discordant symphony, a dissonant chord in his carefully controlled world. Elara watched, her heart leaping into her throat. His sudden distress was palpable, a crack in his formidable exterior. Are you all right? She asked, a genuine concern colouring her voice. Theron squeezed his eyes shut, willing the sensation away. It was a familiar ache, one he hadn't felt in years, not since. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the cool stone beneath his fingers. It is nothing, he managed, his voice strained, but the beast within him howled, a silent internal scream that echoed the agony of a forgotten past. Something was stirring, something ancient and terrible, awakened by her proximity. His own curse, buried deep, was beginning to crack. Sabotage and protection. Elara watched Theron struggle, the raw agony contorting his features. His curse, a shadowy counterpart to her own forced imprisonment, stirred, a venomous echo of the power he had unleashed to free her. As he doubled over, a strangled cry tearing from his throat, the metallic tang of fear pricked at her tongue. Was this the cost of her freedom? His beast, though a silent observer, pulsed with a fierce, protective energy that seemed to shield her from the worst of his pain, a strange, comforting presence in the chaos. Meanwhile, in a hushed corner of the council chambers, Elder Lysander's face was a mask of furious concentration. She must not become a problem, he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper, to Kale. The Alpha has shown an uncharacteristic weakness. We must reinforce the original judgment. A small accident will suffice. Kyle, ever eager to please, nodded, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He already had a plan. The following morning, a messenger arrived at Theron's private wing, bearing a small, intricately carved box. "A gift, Your Majesty, from Elder Lysander," the messenger announced, bowing low. "A token of goodwill for the recent unpleasantness." Theron, still recovering from the night's affliction, eyed the box with a flicker of suspicion. His beast, a growl rumbling deep within his chest, pressed forward, its spectral form radiating an almost palpable warning. "Open it," Theron commanded, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the box. Elara, standing a respectful distance away, felt a prickling sensation on her skin, a vague unease that mirrored the beast's agitation. As the lid was lifted, a cloud of iridescent dust billowed out, catching the light like 1,000 tiny diamonds. The messenger gasped, stumbling backward. But before the dust could reach Ilara, Theron's beast surged forward, a shimmering, protective shield of energy enveloping her. The dust, instead of touching her, swirled harmlessly against the beast's ethereal form, then dissipated into nothingness. Theron stared, his eyes widening. His beast, a primal force of fury, let out a guttural roar that vibrated through the very stones of the palace, shaking the very air. The messenger, white-faced and trembling, collapsed to the floor. Seraphina, who had been standing guard outside, rushed in, sword drawn, her gaze sweeping the room. Her eyes, usually impassive, lingered on Ilara for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable crossing them before she refocused on Theron. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice tight with concern. Theron, though still weakened, felt a surge of adrenaline. His beast's reaction was undeniable. This was no mere unpleasantness. This was an attack, and it was aimed at Ilara. The dust, he realized, must have been a potent, fast-acting poison designed to mimic a natural illness, further cementing the narrative of her forbidden blood. His beast's possessive fury, directed solely at Ilara's protection, solidified a burgeoning certainty in his mind. The council had lied. They were still lying. "Get the physician," Theron ordered, his voice laced with a dangerous calm. "And bring me Lysander. Immediately." His gaze swept over the prone messenger, then settled on the now empty box. "And send word to Kyle. I wish to know where he was this morning." The beast, its spectral eyes burning with an incandescent glow, nudged Ilara gently, a silent reassurance. Ilara, though shaken, felt a profound sense of relief, followed by a surge of something she hadn't expected. A quiet, blossoming trust. The beast, wild and untamed, was hers to some degree, and in its protection she found a strange anchor. Theron, witnessing the subtle exchange, felt a cold resolve harden within him. The beast's primal instinct was never wrong, its unwavering dedication to Ilara, its violent rejection of the council's malice, could only mean one thing. Ilara was innocent, and the council, led by Lysander, had orchestrated a deliberate, cruel deception. The pain of his curse, though still a dull ache, suddenly felt less significant than the growing fire of his suspicion. He would uncover the truth, whatever the cost. The game had changed. Unveiled lies. The scent of ozone still clung to the air, a metallic tang that mingled with the lingering fear in the council chambers. Theron stood before the High Council, a silent, unyielding monolith. His eyes, usually a stormy grey, were now molten silver, reflecting the furnace of his inner rage. Lysander, usually so composed, shifted in his seat, the ornate carvings of his chair digging into his back. Kyle, beside him, visibly trembled, his gaze darting from Theron to Lysander, then to the floor. Ilara, still pale, but with a newfound spark of defiance in her eyes, stood under Seraphina's watchful gaze, a silent testament to the council's deceit. "Explain." Theron's voice rumbled, low and dangerous, a predator's growl barely contained. The single word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Lysander cleared his throat, attempting to regain his usual authoritative posture. "Alpha King, we have already explained. The divinations, the tests, all pointed to a lie," Theron interrupted, his voice rising, each syllable a hammer blow. "A poisoned gift, delivered by your own hand, Elder. A gift intended for Ilara, to silence her permanently. My beast would not allow it." A collective gasp rippled through the council members. Their eyes, once filled with self-importance, now widened with dawning horror. They had seen the beast's ferocity, its primal intelligence. To defy it was unthinkable. "Nonsense, Alpha King!" Lysander scoffed, though a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. The beast is unpredictable. Perhaps it merely misinterpreted. It protected her. Theron snarled, his eyes fixing on Lysander with an intensity that made the elder flinch. It recognized her innocence. It recognized your treachery. He turned his gaze to Coil, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. You were present when this gift was prepared, Coil. Tell me, what was its true purpose? Kyle swallowed hard, his face ashen. He glanced at Lysander, a silent plea for guidance, but Lysander's expression was stony, unforgiving. The younger guard was caught between a rock and a hard place, and the Alpha King's glare was the more immediate threat. It was a sedative, Alpha King, Kyle stammered, his voice barely a whisper, to ensure she caused no further trouble. A sedative, Kale? Or something far more potent? Theron pressed, his voice deceptively soft, yet laced with venom. He took a step closer to Kyle, his imposing shadow falling over the trembling man. Speak the truth, or face the consequences of aiding a conspiracy against your Alpha. Kyle's resolve crumbled. The fear in his eyes was palpable. He cast another desperate look at Lysander, but the elder merely stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Kyle knew he was on his own. It wasn't just a sedative, Alpha King, Kyle blurted out, his voice cracking. It was meant to make her sick, to make it look like an illness. Lysander said it was necessary to maintain order. He said her blood, it wasn't forbidden, it was different. The revelation hung in the air, thick with betrayal. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, whispers beginning to spread like wildfire. Different, one elder murmured, looking at Lysander with suspicion. What does he mean? Different? Lysander finally stirred, his composure shattered. Coil, you fool! You misunderstand. I misunderstand nothing. Theron's voice cut through the rising clamour, sharp and cold. He turned his gaze back to Lysander, his eyes burning with accusation. You knew. You all knew. Her blood wasn't a curse. It was something else entirely. Something you feared. Something you sought to control. Lysander pushed himself to his feet, his face contorted with a desperate fury. Her power, Alpha King, it is too great, too volatile. It could unravel our society. We merely sought to protect our people, to maintain stability. By condemning an innocent woman? Theron thundered, his fist slamming onto the heavy oak table, making the room vibrate. By attempting to murder her, you did not protect, you schemed. You feared what you could not understand, and rather than seek knowledge, you sought to destroy. The council chamber descended into chaos. Voices rose in outrage, some defending Lysander, others denouncing him. The intricate tapestry of lies, woven so carefully by the High Council, was unravelling thread by thread. Ilara watched, a tremor running through her, not of fear but of a dawning realization. Her blood, her curse, was something more, and Theron, the Alpha King, was now her unlikely protector, a force against the very system he once upheld. The truth, raw and brutal, was finally out in the open, and its implications would shake the very foundations of their realm. The Awakening. The air in the council chambers crackled with an unprecedented fury. Lysander, his face a mask of purple rage, lunged forward, not at Theron, but at Ilara, a poisoned dagger flashing in his hand. "The blood must be purged!" he shrieked, his voice distorted, no longer the calm, paternal tone she'd once known. Seraphina cried out, a sharp, warning sound, but it was Kael, still trembling from his confession, who reacted first, tackling Lysander from the side. The struggle was brief, brutal. The dagger clattered to the stone floor, but not before Lysander's clawed hand found purchase on Coil's arm, tearing a ragged gash. "Traitor!" Lysander roared, struggling against Coil, who, despite his fear, held fast, but the distraction was enough. From the shadows, two more figures, cloaked and silent, materialized, lunging at Theron. These were no ordinary guards. Their movements were too precise, too practiced. Theron met their assault, head-on, his movements a blur of raw power. A guttural growl ripped from his chest, deeper, more primal than Alara had ever heard. The very foundations of the chamber seemed to tremble. As Theron wrestled with his assailants, a terrifying transformation began. His eyes, usually a piercing sapphire, deepened to an inky black, rimmed with an ominous red. Veins pulsed like thick ropes beneath his skin, and his muscles swelled, straining the fabric of his tunic. The air around him grew heavy, charged with an oppressive energy that made Alara's skin prickle. It was the curse, awakened by the threat, by the betrayal, by the need to protect. A dark, swirling mist began to emanate from him, coalescing into shadowy tendrils that snaked across the floor, reaching for his attackers. They cried out, not in pain, but in terror, recoiling from the touch of the abyssal magic. Theron was losing control, the power consuming him, his human form warring with something ancient and monstrous. His roars were no longer just fury, they were laced with agony, a desperate struggle against the darkness threatening to engulf him. He was a maelstrom of shadow and rage, barely recognizable. Alara watched, transfixed, a cold dread twisting in her gut. She felt the despair radiating from him, a silent scream of a king trapped within his own curse. Her heart ached with an unfamiliar, profound sorrow. In that moment, fear was eclipsed by an urgent, desperate need to reach him, to pull him back from the precipice. Without conscious thought, she extended her hands, palms open towards the swirling darkness that threatened to devour Theron. A warmth bloomed in her chest, a sensation unlike anything she had ever known, spreading rapidly through her veins. It wasn't the searing heat of fever or the chill of fear, but a vibrant, living energy that hummed with a forgotten melody. A soft, ethereal light began to emanate from her fingertips, not the harsh glare of a torch, but a gentle, pulsing luminescence, like moonlight caught in mist. It was pale gold at first, then deepened to a vibrant, shimmering silver, swirling with faint, iridescent blues and greens, the symbols etched into her skin, the ones the council had deemed a curse, began to glow faintly beneath her tunic, visible through the fabric as a soft, internal light. The air around her thickened, no longer just the oppressive weight of Theron's curse, but infused with a delicate, wild scent of damp earth after a spring rain, of ancient forests, of something utterly untamed. The very stones beneath her feet seemed to hum in response, vibrating with an ancient resonance. As her magic surged, the glowing light intensified, casting dancing shadows across the chamber. It pushed back against Theron's encroaching darkness, not with force, but with a gentle, persistent warmth. Where her light touched the shadowy tendrils, they didn't dissipate violently, but receded, melting away like frost in the morning sun. Theron, still locked in a desperate battle with the encroaching curse, paused. His roars subsided into ragged gasps. He looked at her, his eyes still dark, but a flicker of recognition, a desperate plea piercing through the blackness. His beast, the primal core of him, stirred, not in agony this time, but in a profound, yearning awe. It recognized the light, the ancient song, the forgotten magic that sang in harmony with its very essence. The ground continued to tremble, but it was no longer solely from Theron's struggle. The vibrations now pulsed with Alara's growing power, an awakening that resonated deep within the earth itself. Lysander and his remaining conspirators stood frozen, their faces etched with a fear far greater than any physical threat. They had not merely sought to control a girl with unusual blood, they had unknowingly awakened a dormant power, a magic woven into the very fabric of their world, a lineage they had tried to erase from history. Ilara's forgotten bloodline, a magic of healing and balance, was not a curse to be purged, but a force of nature rising to meet the encroaching darkness. Bound by blood, the ethereal light pulsing from Ilara intensified, pushing back the encroaching shadows that writhed around Theron. It was not a violent expulsion, but a gentle, insistent pressure, a warmth that sought to soothe the monstrous agony contorting his features. As her light met his darkness, a strange phenomenon occurred. The inky tendrils that had been tearing at Theron's form didn't dissipate. Instead, they began to weave, intertwining with the golden threads of Ilara's magic. Like two opposing currents meeting, they swirled, clashing, then coalescing into something new, something breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly powerful. Theron's guttural roars softened into a deep, vibrating hum. His monstrous form, still vast and shadowed, seemed to solidify, the tortured edges of his transformation becoming less ragged, more defined. The raw, uncontrolled power that had threatened to consume him was now being channeled, contained by the delicate yet unyielding force of Ilara's magic. She felt a profound connection snap into place, a tether not of iron, but of ancient blood and awakened magic. It was as if her very being was now linked to his, a crucial component in the intricate machinery of his curse. Her blood hummed with a forgotten song, a melody of healing and protection that reverberated through her bones, resonating with the very core of Theron's being. A gasp tore from Seraphina's lips, but it was lost in the cacophony of the chamber. Lysander, still struggling in Kyle's iron grip, watched with wide, horrified eyes. The fear that had gripped him earlier now transformed into a primal terror as he witnessed the impossible. Ilara, the cursed girl he had condemned, was not destroying the Alpha King. She was saving him. And in doing so, she was revealing a power that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. The light and shadow continued their intricate dance, swirling faster, tightening around Theron until he became a beacon of both. His eyes, once pools of predatory darkness, now held glints of gold, mirroring the light emanating from Ilara. Their connection was palpable, a shimmering cord of energy that pulsed between them, visible to all in the chamber. It was more than magic, it was an emotional current, a merging of souls. Ilara felt his pain, his ancient weariness, but also a burgeoning hope, a fierce protectiveness that resonated with her own blossoming strength. Memories, fragmented and ancient, flashed through Ilara's mind, images of a forgotten queen, wreathed in light, standing beside a king whose form shimmered with shadow. A prophecy, whispered by an old crone, echoed in her ears. When the Shadow King's curse takes hold, only the true light, born of ancient blood, can bind him whole. Her blood, the very thing Lysander had condemned, was the key. Her lineage, long suppressed and hidden, was not a mark of shame, but a mark of destiny. She was not merely a girl accused of forbidden magic. She was the missing piece, the other half of a prophecy, vital to the survival of the Alpha King, and, by extension, the entire kingdom. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stripping away years of fear and self-doubt. She was Ilara, daughter of a forgotten line, bearer of the light, destined to stand beside the Alpha King. Theron's transformation stabilized. He was still monstrous, still shadowed, but the agony was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. He stood, towering and majestic, a being of both light and darkness, bound together by Ilara's magic. He looked at her, his golden eyes deep and knowing, and in their depths she saw not the condemnation of a king, but the fierce recognition of a protector, a partner. The chamber was silent, save for the ragged breaths of Coil, still holding Lysander, and the soft hum of power that now emanated from Theron and Alara. The air crackled with a new energy, a sense of profound change. The old order, built on fear and deceit, was crumbling, shattered by the revelation of true power and an undeniable bond. This was not an ending, but a beginning. A new era was dawning for the kingdom, an era forged in light and shadow, bound by blood, and led by two beings whose destiny had finally intertwined. Theron, no longer just the Alpha King, but a king made whole by his true queen. Alara, no longer the condemned, but the beacon of hope, the heart of the kingdom. Their bond, forged in fire and magic, was strong, a testament to a truth that had been suppressed for too long. Lysander's plot had failed, not just in its execution, but in its very foundation. He had sought to destroy the key, only to unlock a power that would now redefine their world.